And again, as we see here, the re-election campaign, and Sherman really hands Lincoln this present of Atlanta.
As assuming that Gettysburg and Vicksburg wouldn't be enough to put him over McClellan,
Right.
A cashier general, who'd been basically cashiered for incompetence in the same war that he's trying to take control over by becoming president.
Exactly. And so then again, by that time of November '64, we see Sherman just completely annihilate Georgia.
Well, and the Confederates, there's just nobody in the way.
Exactly.
The Army of Northern Virginia is really their last force that still exists.
Right.
They have scattered militias and things, but just no real strong. They have garrisons. We see in the movie Glory. But garrisons holding forts don't really win you a war.
No, no, and especially not to this. And again, we see here by again the turn of '65, Sherman is now moved into South Carolina. He'll move up into North Carolina, and he'll eventually meet up with Grant in Virginia.
So I mean, takes Columbia,
Right.
and South Carolina is the seat of the rebellion.
Exactly.
And now it's got blue.
Right. And so we move on into now Grant in the East, where we mentioned before, Grant is one that is, he gets the nickname unconditional surrender. And there's a reason for that, because he's not going to give in. And he will not, especially by '64 into '65. And so we see here, he is going to take the war onto Lee. And he is going to destroy anything in his path.
And there's the anecdote of somebody asking Lincoln to basically demote or take Grant out of action because he just racks up these huge casualty counts. But Lincoln's like, I can't spare this man. He fights.
Right.
He is willing to fight. And we've got to remember, that's back in 1862 when Lincoln's still going through generals in the East. Like, oh, look, here you are. Goodbye. Hello, goodbye. Pope. There's a bunch of other guys that last months sometimes, if that.
Right.
Because they're just not very good, and they're not willing to push the fight.
Right. And again, we notice here that Lee is starting to lose more and more men that he cannot replenish.
Well, he's starting to lose them to disease.
Right.
Because his food supplies are really cut apart.
Right.
The Civil War has just got the grotesqueness of everything. Disease, we talked about the amputations, the casualty counts. Just everything piles on, probably until World War I. It's going to be one of the bloodiest wars we see.
Right. And again, talking about that idea, again, this siege of Petersburg for 10 months, this is where we're starting to find that beginnings of the 20th century style of warfare, where the trenches are going to bog down those on both sides. Of the Confederates trying to hold Petersburg, the Union's forces trying to take Petersburg, and they just meet in that stalemate, and it's almost like the Somme in France.
Yeah, it becomes a bloodbath because we're seeing, at least especially in the Union side, we're seeing repeating carbines. We're seeing the Gatling gun. We're seeing the first in the Navy, especially the breech loading. Instead of going around the front and loading it, they're breech loading. You're putting a shell in and firing it off, which means your rate of fire just quadrupled really fast.
Right.
And that's just a recipe: metal hitting flesh a lot more often.
It makes it for pretty much a disaster on all fronts.
Oh, and of course, trench warfare. Anybody who's seen any of the movies about World War I, it's just grotesque.
Yes.
Trench foot, rats,
disease, everything.
And it's this 10 months that goes through a winter.
Yeah.
It doesn't get super cold in Virginia, but it's colder than I'd want to be outside.
Exactly. And especially when you don't have very good food supplies, especially if you're a Confederate.
Right. But even in the north, you don't got enough wood to keep yourself warm.
No.
It's a brutal picture.
And then we move into, again, this idea by 1865, April 65, Richmond is captured.
So now the capital of the Confederacy is now gone.
Right. And if you know anything of course, when it comes to military historians, they'll tell you, if you capture the capital, you've pretty much won the war.
It's where the whole game, capture the flag.
Right, right. Again, you go to capture your capital to get your victory. And again, by this time, we're waiting.
And I mean, where are you going to move the capital?
Right.
I don't even know where they do move it. I just never paid attention.
Don't really know. I can't honestly tell you.
Alabama?
Maybe.
Because the East is lost.
Yes.
I mean, North Carolina is still there, but it's
Yeah,
not very
but it's
populated.
no, it's not.
And then Georgia's gone,
Yep.
South Carolina's gone,
Yep.
Florida doesn't have a whole lot of population
No,
to
they
begin
don't
with.
either.
So you'd have to be moving into Alabama or Mississippi for your capital.
Something.
And all the structure that the Confederates built up in just the space of this 3 years of war, they've built a government, a brand new government, a federal, not a federal, a Confederate
government. Yeah.
A little bit closer to the Articles of Confederation
Yes.
than the North,
Right.
but that's all gone now.
Right.
And that's going to be hard to rebuild because who went there? The best and brightest would go there to help run the economy for the war, make laws to help the war. Everybody goes there, and yes, they probably didn't get captured because they evacuated.
Right.
But-
But still.
You've destroyed their ability to be a cohesive government.
Exactly.
Now you're literally talking about the North fighting North Carolina, the North fighting Alabama, the North fighting Mississippi as almost separate wars.
Exactly. And there's really nothing left. And so we're ultimately here. We're ultimately here now to the final of the finals, and that is Appomattox. By April of 1865, April 9 to be exact, we start to see now this unofficial surrender of the Confederates. And again, it's not that even meaningful, really.
I mean, Lee surrenders, but that's the last army the Confederates have.
Yeah.
Again, you've got these pockets of
Right,
people.
you've got little skirmishes here and there, but it's nothing to
But
be...
it's any one of the Union armies will run over that as soon as it hits the battlefield.
Exactly.
Even at the beginning of the war, the size difference would be so enormous that the South has no hope. Their
Exactly.
cavalry is almost completely gone, so they're reduced to people who aren't wearing boots,
Yep.
ragged clothing that don't match, guns,
Starving.
and literally hiding in the hills because they know they cannot fight Grant, they can't fight Sherman.
No.
It's just, they can't come out and fight a fair fight. So the South is really kind of gearing up
Mm-hmm.
for a guerrilla war
Mm-hmm.
when Jefferson Davis throws in the towel.
Exactly.
He basically agrees with Lee. There's no reason to keep fighting.
Right.
It's not going to do anything but get a lot of people killed.
Yep.
And the North, interesting enough, I almost would think that Jefferson Davis is probably almost counting on the fact that he knows Lincoln. He
Right.
knows who he is
Yes,
as a
he does.
person.
He does.
That Lincoln is going to be more merciful
Mm-hmm.
than anybody else in the North.
Well, and you're right. And again, it says here even that Grant is in that same situation. Grant being that Ohio, first Ohio resident, then moving into Illinois and St. Louis. But the idea is he's just as lenient as Lincoln might be.
He's a Lincoln Republican,
Right.
really, when it
You're
comes
right.
down
He
to it.
is. And I
So whether it's official or not, Appomattox Courthouse is the end of the war.
yes.
And we come to the close
Right.
with 600,000 plus dead.
Right. Some historians believe it may be a little more than that. It may be up to the 750,000. Some may say a little less, but we're pretty certain it's at least to the 600,000, if not
Probably.
more.
When you figure in the underestimates for people who were lost and
Right.
died and nobody knew,
Right.
in places like the wilderness where a
Right.
fire took over.
Yes.
As opposed to the guys who just didn't show up for muster the next morning.
Exactly. Exactly. But
That's-
again, it's
huge.
it's huge. It is.
Especially when you consider the population of the United States at the time.
Mhm.
And you're not taking it from the general population, you're taking
No.
it from that group of men typically between 18 and 30.
Right.
Those are the ones that are taking the brunt of these casualties.
Exactly.
And, the North's leadership, or the South's leadership is devastated.
Yes.
Jeb Stuart's dead.
Yes.
Uh,
Johnston is dead.
Jackson is dead. Stonewall Jackson is dead.
Everyone is really just.
Lee is almost
He's
enfeebled.
devastated.
I mean, his morale is
Yes.
shot.
Yes.
He's watched his army dwindle to hardly anything of
Right.
its former glory. He's watched his state be destroyed in the fighting.
And that's, again, a huge, huge turnaround for him. It makes it more difficult. And he will retire to his home across the Potomac from Washington, D.C.
As a descendant, or
Yes.
he was married to a descendant,
Yes.
wasn't he?
Yes,
of
he
George
was.
Washington.
Yes. And so again, we come to a close on this chapter of American history that, well, many of us would probably say we'd like not to remember.
But going back to our main topic that brought us here, slavery.
Right.
While it was the impetus for the South. It was
Right.
the motivation for the South to begin the war.
Right.
It wasn't really for the North until the Emancipation Proclamation.
Exactly.
Until those midterm elections had returned into the House a large group of rabid Republicans.
Exactly.
The radical Republicans.
The radical Republicans,
Rabid
for sure.
might be kind of mean, but they were frothing at the mouth to get their hands around the throat of the South.
Yes.
And stamp out slavery forever.
Right.
That was their goal.
Right.
Which, may have been part of the move for Lincoln to do the Emancipation Proclamation.
Could have been.
It would keep his political fortunes under control. You wouldn't want a house that's farther to the right, I guess.
Yes.
More pro freedom than you are.
Yes.
Because then they're going to start digging around in your war.
Yes, exactly.
And could possibly lose it because 2 chiefs, let alone a couple hundred chiefs, is
Right.
going to be a nightmare. So we don't really hear much more about Congress after that, as far as a factor in his decision making. He doesn't have to go to
No.
them hat in hand.
No.
He presents a budget, they pass it, and we move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
very much. He was very good at the politics, where you wouldn't think he doesn't really have the experience.
No.
You would expect for him to master a brand new political party
Exactly.
that comes from a wild number of political
Yes.
parties
Yes.
and manage it to a successful conclusion of a war.
Mhm.
Now, granted, a war that took probably 2 years longer than the economics would have told us.
Yes, exactly.
But then again, that leadership gap held them back.
Mhm.
And that leadership gap at the end is gone.
Right.
You have Grant, you have Sherman, who's a maneuver guy, like a Judge
Right.
Stewart, go
Again.
around everybody. And
Again, yes, definitely.
I mean, the North has a bunch of great generals.
Mhm.
One, I don't know if I would consider him great, but famous,
Yeah.
George Armstrong Custer.
Right.
He becomes famous a little bit later
Yeah.
in another battle against them.
Right.
Them.
The yes.
Yeah,
The ones
that
that we
are
don't want.
The others that
Right.
are different than us and
Right.
therefore less.
must be
less. So.
Yes. Well, thank you again for joining us again. We say it every time, but make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like and share, and let your friends know about it.
And don't hesitate to comment.
Yes.
Let us know if there's something we're doing that you're like, oh my gosh, I fell asleep and planted my head in my breakfast.
Yes.
Let us know that, obviously if it's catastrophically different, we can't give you graphics and battlefields.
Of course not.
But we're going to try our best to keep improving this as we
Right.
go. So
Right.
thank you.
Thank you.